What up, y'all? It's Dev, Mtg. We like it, a magic here to close out Brothers War preview season. It's been a wild one this whole time, and we got 40 more cards to cover today. But as usual for the last day of preview season, they're mostly like commons that are role players and sealed at best. But again, as usual for the last day, a few of these, they decided to sneak in like impactful, actual playable cards. So I've done the work for you. Don't worry. I've decided to sift through the butts to bring you the nuts. And today we're going to talk about the best cards from the last day of spoiler season. Now, before we get to the stuff from today that I think has the potential to be actually relevant, let's look at a couple of cards that I want to talk about just because I think they're neat. Is that okay? I'm not going to spend too long on these, but I think we need to make time sometimes for cards like Supply Drop, just because I think it's so cool, right? I mean, it's a 3-mana artifact with flash. When it ETBs, a creature you control gets +2/+2 till end of turn. You can pay 4, tap it, sack it, draw yourself a card. So a little bit of utility here. It's a combat trick that Power Stones can help you cast, and obviously Power Stones help you use the activated ability too. So a combat trick and draw a card. Both modes are a little overcosted, but again, Power Stones, whatever. So I'm not sure how many copies of this you actually end up playing in your sealed deck or whatever, but I at least wanted to put a spotlight on this card because I think it's cool, and I'm not sure how many people are actually going to be talking about it from here on out. But moment in the sun, buddy. But anyway, let's move on to a trio of cards that it took us all season to see, all 3 Caballeros together, which is really nice. But we finally saw Tower Worker today, but we had seen Power Plant Worker and Mine Worker previously. Power Plant Worker is 5 mana. It's a 4/4 artifact creature. They're all assembly workers. You can pay 3 and have Worker get +2/+2 till end of turn. If you control creatures named Mine Worker and Tower Worker, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on Worker instead. You can only do this once each turn, because they're lame. I really wish you could do it more than once each turn. But, all of these are designed in such a way that they're not totally embarrassing to play unlimited if you don't have the other pieces out. But you really shouldn't be playing them in your deck if you don't have the other pieces. So keep that in mind. But at the same time, a 5-mana 4/4 is not horrible. And sometimes you can use like Power Stones to make it a 6/6. So sure, even if you don't have the other 2 out, like I'll take that body in limited some of the time. But here they start to get a little bit more interesting than just like, I guess it's fine in limited. Mine Worker is 2 mana for a 2/1. Again, it's assembly worker. You can tap it to gain a life, but if you control creatures named the other 2, you gain 3 life instead. So not a whole lot of punch here and still really only relevant in limited. But I do like the idea in some decks of being able to cast this for any color of mana, and it's like a life gain trigger too, right? Just tap to gain a life. It doesn't have the most embarrassing stats, but again, in limited, these 2-mana 2/1s that do like an extra thing are usually just seen as curve fillers. So it's not embarrassing to play this card, but at the same time, could be better, right? But we'll move on to Tower Worker. This costs 3 for a 1/3. It's an assembly worker with reach. You can tap it to add a colorless, but if you control creatures named the other 2, you can tap it for 3 colorless. That's pretty hot. This is my favorite one, It's mostly just a rock, 3 mana tap for a colorless. Not a very good rock either, but if you do have the other 2 out, man, tapping for 3 is relevant. Super relevant. So much so that if you do have all 3 of these in limited, sometimes your opponent might want to kill this. Well, that leaves your Power Plant Worker out, and he's still like getting big every turn. Maybe he's already gotten a couple of counters. This taps to put 2 counters on a worker, a Power Plant Worker. So that's neat. Just all together, neat little package here. They're all common. So if you want to draft the, Urza lands, but they're artifact creatures sort of deck in limited, you can have some fun with that. And once you do have them out, and especially if you have multiple copies of like Tower and you got all 3 of them out, you're probably having a ball, but it does take a lot of setup to get there. Good thing about that is in this limited environment, it looks like you're going to get it. I don't see a whole lot of aggro. I mean, sure, you can play aggro, but I'm not sure you're going to have the best time in the world. This looks like a pretty plodding little limited environment, which gives you the perfect amount of time to set up something like this. But again, you kind of got to go all in drafting, and how many powerful cards do you actually have slots left for if you draft, one of each of these or maybe 2 of each of these somehow? Do you really have a lot of slots left in your deck to actually do stuff? So I'm not sure how it's going to go, but it's fun one way or the other, and I like the callback. But let's get into some good stuff, maybe. This is Tamiyo Scrapsmith here. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 2/1 human artificer. When it ETBs, you mill 3 cards. You may put an artifact card from among the cards milled this way into your hand. If you don't, you put a +1/+1 counter on Scrapsmith. So this is neither the best or worst of this cycle, but obviously in limited, you're probably going to be playing some artifacts. you know, there's a lot of artifacts in this set, so it shouldn't be too hard to grab something off of this. If it does get a +1/+1 counter, it's just a 3-mana 3/2. Not impressive. But maybe you mill something. But obviously, there's a line with this card where you bring back an artifact, but also mill an unearthed guy into your yard. That's pretty sweet. Altogether, though, in Standard, this has the ability to effectively be 3-mana 2/1 draw a card and put 2 other cards in your yard. And I kind of like this whole cycle for that reason. You know, it's not the best value in the world, but it's at least some value. I think the white one might be, if not the best one, then maybe the blue one is the best one. Those are pretty good. I plan on playing the green one in these like self-mill Golgari decks and stuff. It might get some love. And then, you know, black one is limited playable, sort of, but still. I think Tamiyo Scrapsmith is like right in the middle of all of these, and it's still kind of an exciting card because I'm kind of a sucker for 3-mana draw a card and mill 2 more. If you really want to be weird about it, you can say this is a 3-mana draw 3. It's not, but some Magic players want to look at it that way. But red got a few decent things today, right? We'll look at one now and then one way later on down the line. The one now is DFC, baby. Dwarven forge-chanter is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 1/3 dwarf wizard with ward, pay 2 life. And it also has prowess. It's kind of a nice little package, man. You cast like 1 spell, you're swinging 2, you know, they want to kill it, it's ward, pay 2 life. If you cast 2 spells, then suddenly you really got the mana value out of this in terms of PT. So, I don't know. I like it. I don't know how much play this could actually see in Standard, but I wanted to point it out because not only is it one of the strongest cards of the day, but it's one that might actually surprise all of us a little bit. Ward 2 life is actually kind of no joke in a deck that's actually dealing damage to its opponent. Ward 2 life is kind of serious. And the prowess on this can get out of hand. Again, if it gets to 3-4 power, maybe you cast a pump spell on it and it prowesses, it's getting serious pretty fast. So I think this thing is actually kind of neat, and I wanted to point it out. Now let's move on to Spectrum Sentinel, a neat little card here. There are a bunch of those today. This is just 1 mana for a 1/2 artifact creature who is also a soldier. Neat. It has protection from multicolored. Okay. And whenever a non-basic land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you gain a life. It's so cool, you know? Like, I actually think this is Commander playable with all the non-basic lands running around and stuff. You might gain, you know, basically 3 life per turn cycle, and that's if they don't do shenanigans to put other non-basic lands into play past, you know, the normal 1 per turn limit. So it's cool. I'm not sure how great it actually would be in that format, but maybe you need life gain triggers. It's there for you there. In Standard, though, I could see this, you know, helping the Soldiers deck winning a race or 2 here and there by gaining maybe 3-4 life over the course of a game or something. And protection from multicolored is nothing to sneeze at, you know. It's like Stone Coil Serpent. We saw that is, depending on the Standard meta, obviously, but in some cases, that can be really relevant. So if you actually find a way to increase this thing's PT, I mean, just a second turn, you know, Valiant Veteran as an Anthem effect, you're swinging for 2 with the protection from multicolor guy, and you're gaining life. It only costs you 1. It's got the relevant artifact or the creature type. And you can play it off of like Pain Land Mana. What is that? But Painland Mana. And it doesn't cost you any life to do that. It's just, I actually think this is a neat little 1-drop for the Soldiers deck, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it show up there, especially maybe out of sideboards. But is it worth the sideboard slot to play this card? I'm just not super sure, but I think it's a really cool design, right? But we'll move on. It's a Military Discipline. This is just a single white mana for an aura. With flash, you enchant a creature, and when it ETBs, enchanted creature gains first strike until end of turn. Creature also gets +1/+0. This doesn't look like much, but I'd like to get a conversation started with the green, white, or Naya Enchantress mages down there. If you still play that deck in Standard for 1, I don't love playing against that deck, but it's a very cool deck, so I can't really blame you. But for 2, how do you feel about like 1 copy of this lurking somewhere in your deck or more, right? I don't know that the opportunity cost is probably a bit too high on this one. You probably have better ways to use those slots in what is already a super tight deck list. But I'm a little bit interested in this, right? I mean, how many times does your Jukai Naturalist get gang tackled on turn 3 or 4, right? And how many times would a card exactly like this just blow your opponents out? If you put it on a combi of Transients, Trample, First Strike, you know, they thought they were going to gang tackle it and kill it, but suddenly it kills everything blocking it. You know, I just think that there are ways to make this card really good in the green-white enchantments deck, and it's not even that hard to, you know, come up with scenarios where the card would be just crazy in the even early, but especially in the mid game where a lot of people are trying to, you know, gang tackle that naturalist. or get rid of that, Michiko's Reign of Truth creature, or the Michiko herself once she flips over. So, first strike is always better than we give it credit for. And even though this is just kind of like, this is the typical red combat trick that we see every single set, but this time it's white and it's on an aura. And I think that might make all the difference. Getting that, you cast an enchantment value off of either, Kami of Transience, getting the +1/+1 counter, Generous Visitor, giving the +1/+1 counter to something else, Michiko's Reign of Truth, or Michiko herself again, counting this as an aura and getting a little bit bigger. I just think that there are ways to flash this in and blow people out, but is it worth the slot? But now we're in basically like the top 5-ish here, so I'm going to start showing my face for these, because we're going to get into stuff that I really think has a chance, starting with a fitting number 5, because I'm not sure this really has the chance to go the distance in Standard, but I do think it's easily the best card we've looked at so far. This is Gixian Infiltrator here. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 2/1 Phyrexian human. Whenever you sacrifice another permanent, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So this is just Body Dropper, but it's not hard to cast, and go. So this is just Body Dropper, but it's easier to cast, and it doesn't have an activated ability that you never use anyway. One of the cool things about Body Dropper is that it's self-fulfilling. Like, you can sacrifice a thing to it gets counter, it gets menace, and blah, blah, blah. But this doesn't have that sort of that feedback loop that's on the card itself to where it closes the loop. But it is still kind of an interesting little card. It's probably mostly limited playable. I'm not going to lie to you. But again, it being easier to cast than Body Dropper, you're not having to go like Mardu in order to play this in like Orzhov Sacrifice or something, I think it might make some degree of difference. There's also a slight difference in the power toughness, but who's counting? Especially now that Meat Hook is gone. But still, I think this is a cool little card that is more than worth pointing out. If you sacrifice, treasures and stuff like that. Let me double check something real quick. I want to make sure that it's not exactly Body. Yeah, Body Dropper is whenever you sacrifice another creature. This is better than Body Dropper. Actually, whenever you sacrifice another permanent, I just wanted to make sure about that. Yeah, this is better than Body Dropper, even without the activated ability. It's easier to cast, and it triggers off of sacrificing treasures, blood tokens, clue tokens, blah, 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 blah. It's just whatever you have to sacrifice. This will trigger off of. So I could see especially with the appropriate amount of treasure tokens in the format. This on turn 2, maybe into Fable of the Mirror Breaker on turn 3, which you're probably going to do anyway. Probably better turn 2 plays than this into that card, but still. This into Fable. If the goblin makes any treasures, you sacrifice those, this gets bigger and stuff. Just that interaction could be good enough. But, anything that makes treasures or even, again, blood tokens, I could see making this thing pretty big. Pretty fast too, maybe engineering a turn where you sacrifice, 3 treasures and a guy all on the same turn, and suddenly he's like a 6 power 2-drop. So, I actually think this card is kind of nuts considering it has the word permanent and not the word creature on it. So, look out for this guy. Let's keep it pushing and take a look at Sentinel Stalwart here. This is just a single green mana for a 1/1 Elf Druid Soldier. And you can tap it and tap an untapped artifact or creature you control to add a mana of any color. So Jaspera Sentinel has found her way back to us. And honestly, I think she's even better this time. You may have lost the point of toughness, just like the last card. Now that I think about it, it's weird. But you may have lost the point of toughness, but you gained relevant creature types. I think Soldier is slightly more relevant than Rogue most of the time. And you can tap artifacts. So again, kind of just like the last card. You can now use treasure tokens and do things, right? Tap treasure tokens for mana, and they stick around, which is, I think, actually super relevant. But again, this works with blood tokens, clue tokens, again, somewhat relevant, with like Briarbridge Tracker or something. So I don't know, man. I think this card is for real. I mean, Jaspera Sentinel did some work the whole time she was in Standard. And again, I think this is just effectively a better version of that card. So again, I would expect to see this one. Also, just for your information, because I thought this was funny, I had to retake this card like 6 times because I kept calling it Steward. I just couldn't stop myself. For some reason, I couldn't not say Steward. So I imagine if we ever play this card on stream, I'm just going to call it Steward the entire time. But let's move on to Curate, which is interesting. It's an interesting card that exists. It is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an instant, Surveil 2, and then draw a card. So it's just a basically strictly better Deliberate, right? I mean, if you can put the cards in your graveyard, that just is better than Deliberate. So I like this. I'm not sure how much better you have to be than Deliberate to see Standard play, because Deliberate doesn't, but still, 2 mana, draw a single card is not usually the best deal in the world. But I think that if you can throw a couple of things in your yard, you're doing okay. There are going to be times where this is effectively scry 1, draw a card because the thing you want is on top of your library. So it might not feel, you can make the argument it doesn't feel great when you just pay 2 to draw the top card of your library effectively. But that's okay. I mean, I guess you still get to surveil. But still, you still get to surveil too. But still, it might not feel super great if you just draw the top card. But still, if the top card of the library is the card you needed, stop complaining. is my take. Still, being able to throw stuff in your yard at instant speed and still draw 2 off of this, I think is actually like just relevant enough to make the cut in very specific decks. I don't think this goes in like blue-red spells or anything. But even with Impulse in the format, I wouldn't be surprised if the odd sort of Reanimator control hybrid wanted to play this over a card like Impulse, for instance. So again, there are interesting choices at 2 mana if you want to be drawing some cards or get some card selection or whatever. But not all of those throw stuff in your yard, and not all of them are instant speed, so I think this card might have a chance. All right, we're basically in the top 3 now. Let's take a look at Lorans Escape. This is a single white mana. For an instant, target artifact or creature gains hexproof and indestructible till the end of turn, and you scry yourself 1 card there. Just, I think, instantly replaces Boon of Safety. I mean, you get the Dream Team, hexproof and indestructible, so they basically can't kill it, save for 1 or 2 cards in the format. They see very little play. Meathook Masker's gone now, and Drag to the Bottom does exist, but come on, it doesn't see anywhere near as much play as Hook, and the last couple of weeks have kind of proved that it very likely won't. So there just aren't a whole lot of minus effects people really play. So for the most part, this is just a get out of jail free card for a single mana and you scry 1. I mean, it's not quite like Snakeskin Veil or anything, but it's still a very sweet card that I think multiple like blue-white decks and such, just any tempo-based deck, is going to freaking love. So it's just anytime you get basically Snakeskin Veil, doesn't matter what color it's in, you have to pay attention to it, whether it's called Slip Out the Back or Blossoming Defense or this. So again, I think that this is probably one of the more standard playable cards of the day. Now, the reason I say it like that is because our last couple of cards I want to look at aren't necessarily super standard playable to me, but they're A, 2 of the most fun looking cards of the day, that does matter, and B, they're both cards that enable a strategy that I've been hoping Wizards would enable in this set, and we finally got a couple of payoffs for it at the end of spoiler season finally. So let's take a look first at Slag Refinery. Now, this is a 4 mana artifact, and whenever it or another non-token artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield or is put into exile from the battlefield, you create a tapped Power Stone token. Again, I don't think that this card is especially powerful, especially at 4 mana, but I guess there's ways that it can pay itself back in terms of mana cost the first turn that it comes out. And that is where it might actually be pretty decent. I mean, it creates, just like everything else, tapped Power Stone tokens. So no matter what broken thing you do with it, you have to wait until the next turn to use all of that mana, and then you have to have something to use it on, obviously. But I actually don't think that could be too difficult in a set full of 8 to 10, 11 mana cost things that you can use Power Stones to pay for. So there's probably some great payoff for this, whether it's that new Meteor Golem or something else, So I just like the idea of this card mostly because, again, I wanted some cards specifically for eggs, old school Magic player. Us old timers know what I'm talking about, but eggs are basically, I feel like I've described this already, the spoiler season, but eggs are like small, low casting cost artifacts that you can usually pay a cost for or sacrifice somehow. And get some sort of, again, small benefit. Usually the reason you're actually playing these things in your deck isn't for the actual benefit that they provide. It's for the synergy they provide in terms of they're cheap artifacts I can play multiples of in a turn and get, little incremental value, but also get value off of casting artifacts or just having artifacts in play or in my yard or whatever. And I really want a deck like that to be a reality. And it looks like this and the next card we see are more signposts for an eggs deck and limited than anything else. But cards like this excite me enough that I'm interested in trying them for standard. If you can sacrifice just 1 or 2 artifacts, or maybe if you have artifact creatures that die in combat, maybe when your opponent is finally incentivized to kill this, you get a Power Stone for that. So if this pays you 3/4 of its mana cost back while it's on the battlefield. I actually think it's a pretty good source of ramp so long as you built your deck accordingly to use it. So, and you should. I mean, your deck's full of artifacts. You're playing this. So you should be able to play just about anything that you get off of Power Stones. Or, you know what I mean. Any card you draw, you should be able to play with Power Stones. So I just like it. I like this card a lot. I like the idea of it. I like its haircut. I think it's a good, I think it's just a good Magic card. And again, even though I'm not super, sure it's going to see all the standard play in the world, it's not incredibly powerful. It is a card I at least want to experiment with. Really refine it, if you will. But let's move on to my favorite card of the day. And I will stress one more time that these are not necessarily cards that I think are going to be incredibly standard playable, but they are cards that I freaking love. So let's take a look at the Strong Bull here, baby. Strong like Bull, the Penregan Strong Bull, to be specific, I guess. This is 3 mana, 2, and a red for a 2/3 Minotaur. Love that Minotaur creature type. Just pop for that whenever I see it. But here's the fun part. You can pay 1 and sacrifice an artifact and have Strong Bull get +1/+1 till end of turn, and it deals the damage to each opponent. Okay, so pay attention to nothing about the card. Don't pay attention to the casting cost, which is actually kind of fair, really, for this effect. But don't pay attention to the PT, the creature type, none of that stuff. Just pay attention to these words. 1, sacrifice an artifact. Deal the damage to each opponent. Now, the fact that it pumps is actually relevant. Your opponent goes to lightning strike it or cast cut down on it. You got a mana open, sacrifice an artifact, maybe the Power Stone that you tapped to use its ability, as a matter of fact. Perhaps. Just spitballing here. And suddenly it's above cut down range, it's above lightning strike range. There are turns where it's potentially possible. Kind of the same word there, but there are turns where you might be able to get in for like 5-6 damage with this thing, or maybe even more, depending on, how you've set up your board state. Again, this looks really good in eggs to me, a good payoff for an eggs deck. When you finally crack them all, you're dealing a damage at a time. I mean, I know you're not dealing 20 damage to an opponent like this, but in a deck full of aggressive enough artifact creatures that deal some amount of damage in the early game, you've got things like Patchwork Automaton to actually go tall rather than wide. I think that's important. And just playing those 1-cost artifacts that you want to sack anyway, that'll grow your automaton. But still, you're getting in incremental damage every now and again. And this is kind of a form of reach, if you can untap with this on the table in like 5 lands, you can just kind of shrapnel blast, you just kind of sack my guys and hit you for 5, get in for as much damage as I can. If you block my guy, then I'll just sacrifice to my Minotaur and, deal damage to you that way. And by the way, I'm attacking with my Minotaur too. So if you block my guys and not my Minotaur, he's going to get pretty big if I sacrifice the guys you blocked. So this is just kind of sick looking to me. Again, I'm not sure how good it is in standard or anything, but I'm going to try to make it a thing, because just like in Commander, maybe too, just because 1, sack an artifact, those 3 things. 1, sack an artifact, deal the damage to each opponent, those are very exciting lines of text for me. Well, that's pretty much all for the last day, y'all. I mean, there were a couple of other things that caught my eye, like Energy Refractor or whatever it's called, this card on screen. 2-mana artifacts to draw a card are kind of fine, but there's just way better stuff. Wedding Invitation's better than this. It sees no play somehow. But in some formats, 2-mana draw a card artifacts can see some play. But there's also, Prison Sentence? This looks like really good limited removal. Very good limited removal. And even beyond, no, it's not. Come on, it's not beyond limited, but it is good limited removal. Just pick it up if you see it. But still, not a whole lot of amazing stuff in the last day, and there usually isn't. But I kind of like the last day because, again, they sneak in stuff that even if it isn't playable, it's fun to talk about or like theory craft on. So there's a lot of good stuff today. Just let me know if I missed a card, and I guess it's time to let me know how you feel about the set too, because I think the set is powerful. I think this might be the most powerful set in standard, as of release day at least. So there's a lot of fun stuff too, not just powerful, but fun stuff to think about and build around and brew with. So I think the set looks pretty good, to be honest. Like, now that we've seen the entire thing, I think the set looks good. And if not super powerful at the end of the day, once the smoke settles, the dust clears, and we see what effect it has on, competitive formats. If it's not super powerful at the end of the day, because there's just too many 10-mana dorks or something like that, then I still think it's a fun set, that there's a lot of cool Commander and Cube and stuff, playable cards like that. So cool set altogether. I like it, and I do think there's plenty of standard playables in this set, and beyond for that matter. But let me know what your opinion is down there in the comments section. That's what it's made for. That's what it's made for. And I think I'm done. So for this one's the whole spoiler season, but make sure that you don't just like leave and never see me again until the next spoiler season, like some of you do. I usually get about a 30% quote unquote new or returning audience. Well, there's a difference, but a new audience during spoiler season. So you guys want to come back? We're still doing like top 10 sleeper video coming up soon. That's going to be one of the next things we do. We're going to do the best of the rest. That is the next thing that we do. We're going to talk a little bit about just this set in general in a video, I think. We're going to do the top 25 or even maybe more than that, obviously. And then deck techs and all that. So like you want to be sub. So hit the bell, turn on notifications, sub to the channel, do all the things. Make sure that I actually show up in your recommended feed. I'd like to show up in more of your recommended feeds. You can also like the video. It doesn't actually do much in terms of the algorithm from what I understand. It just makes me feel better because number is high, you know. So do that if you're into it. And then also you can check out my Patreon. Patreon.com/SBMTG, link in the description. If you just want to pitch me $1 a month, that's all I really ask from you. And that way you'll be able to vote on what stuff we do this season. And you'll also just feel a sense of accomplishment when you see me do like a wacky, kooky video that I had weird ideas for and I filmed it in some strange, godforsaken place or something like that. You'll be like, I contributed to that. So help me out if you can down there. I know it's tough nowadays, but if you can, your support means the world to me. So I'd appreciate it. But aside from that, the last thing, final self-promotion pitch, and I swear to you it's over. If you haven't clicked away yet, I really respect you for that. But aside from that, you can check me out on twitch.tv/SBMTGdev. Again, link in the description. Follow me over there. It's free. You can watch me play with some of these new cards the day the set releases on Arena. But I think I'm done with what feels like my actual job. Sitting here talking on the couch does not feel like my job, but doing the self-promotion stuff that I kind of hate, and I know a lot of you do too, but it's like I'm a YouTuber, I just have to. You suffer through it. That feels like actually a job. So thanks for bearing with me on that one. Anyway, I guess I'm done. Just let me know how you feel about it, and I will hopefully catch every single one of you cats later. I'm Dev from the Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.